Nora Voss set her teacup down without a sound, and the silence of it traveled the length of the dining room table like a current running beneath water. Her husband had just introduced her to his business partner's wife as my housekeeper's assistant. He had smiled when he said it, the easy, distracted smile of a man making a small joke among friends, and moved on before anyone had the chance to decide whether to laugh. Nora did not correct him. She did not look at him. She picked up her fork and cut a small piece of lamb and chewed it slowly and thought that was not a joke. If this story moves something in you tonight, subscribe to Victorian Bonds and follow Nora all the way to the end. The Ashworth dining room seated 24. Nora had known that number since the first week of her marriage. Because she had counted the chairs herself while planning the layout for a dinner she was expected to host for guests whose names her husband had given her on a folded slip of paper the morning before the event. No explanation of who they were to each other. No indication of alliances or old arguments. Just names, like a grocery list, with the assumption that she would work out the rest. She had. She always had. That was in the 3rd month of their marriage. She was 23 years old, newly relocated from Charleston to Boston, newly installed in a brownstone on Marlborough Street that was beautiful in the particular way of houses that have been maintained without affection. She was the second wife of Elliot Ashworth, a 41-year-old shipping attorney, whose first marriage had ended not in scandal but in quiet attrition, the way certain things end when no one fights for them. He had proposed to Nora's father in the old sense, at a dinner arranged by families who had known each other through commerce for 20 years. Nora had been informed of the arrangement 3 weeks before the engagement dinner. She had not been asked. She had not been told she would not be asked. It had simply proceeded, the way water proceeds around stone, finding the path of least resistance, and she had found herself in a new city, with a new last name and a dining room that seated 24, and the quiet understanding that her life now belonged to the management of someone else's. Elliot Ashworth was not unkind. She returned to that truth often in the early years, the way you return to a fact that should comfort you, and discover each time that it comforts you a little less. He was not unkind. He did not raise his voice. He did not demean her or restrict her. He simply did not see her. Not the way a man looks past a woman he dislikes. The way a man looks past a window he has stopped noticing because the view has always been there and always been adequate. She had managed his household, his correspondence, his social calendar, his dinner parties, his charitable donations, and the careful navigation of Boston's legal society for 9 years. She knew which of the colleagues had drinking problems they were managing with varying degrees of success. She knew which of their wives had said unkind things to other wives, and how to seat a dinner party so that none of those fault lines became visible. She had once rerouted an entire evening's conversation away from a remark that would have cost Elliot a partnership worth 3 years of firm income, and she had done it so smoothly that Elliot had never known the danger had existed. And 4 nights ago, at a dinner for 8 at the home of Clifton Morse, his new business partner, Elliot Ashworth had introduced his wife of 9 years as something like my housekeeper's assistant, and laughed, and Clifton Morse had laughed, and the moment had moved on. Nora had smiled. It was a very good smile. She had been producing it for 9 years. The woman beside her, Clifton Morse's wife Adele, had looked at Nora with the particular expression of a woman who understood exactly what had just happened and could do nothing useful with that understanding, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Nora had said, very pleasantly, that the lamb was exceptional, and asked Adele where she'd found her cook. She thought about it on the carriage ride home. She thought about it standing in the dressing room while her maid helped her out of her evening clothes. She thought about it at 2 in the morning, lying in the dark of a bedroom she had never quite felt was hers, listening to the sounds of Marlborough Street, settling into the small hours. She was not thinking about the words themselves. She was thinking about the ease of them, the carelessness. 9 years of her life, her intelligence, her labor pressed invisibly into the structure of his, and the version of her that existed in his mind could be produced, in front of strangers, as a small joke, something like a housekeeper's assistant, and he had not even noticed he'd said it. That was the thing. He had not noticed. She turned onto her side and thought about the dinner she had planned for his firm's senior partners 6 weeks ago. She had spent 2 weeks on the seating arrangement alone. She had memorized the dietary restrictions of 14 people. She had redirected a conversation between 2 men who had a legal dispute neither of them had mentioned to Elliot, spotted it in the way they angled their bodies away from each other over the soup course, and moved the discussion so gently that no one had seen the hand on the wheel. The next morning Elliot had said the dinner went well, and asked her to tell the cook that the beef was slightly overdone. She had told the cook. She had not mentioned the rest of it, because there was no vocabulary in their marriage for the rest of it. At 3 in the morning, something let go. It was not loud. It was not the feeling of a decision being made. It was more like a door she had been leaning against for a very long time finally ceasing to push back. Nora Ashworth sat up in the dark and was very still for a moment, and then got up. She did not pack in a panic. She had never done anything in a panic in her adult life, and she was not going to start at 3 in the morning in a house she had kept running for 9 years. She moved through her dressing room the way she moved through everything, with the particular economy of a woman who has learned that composure is not a luxury but a working tool. She took her own correspondence. Letters from her sister in Charleston, from 2 women she had been quietly helping navigate the charitable foundation paperwork their late husbands had left in disarray, from her former teacher at the Whitmore School, who wrote twice a year with the reliable warmth of someone who had never stopped believing Nora was capable of more than she had so far been permitted to demonstrate. She took her own financial records. Nora had maintained a private ledger since the 2nd year of her marriage, not out of suspicion, but out of the ingrained habit of a woman who had grown up in a household where her father's accountant had taught her, at 12 years old, that a woman who understood her own numbers was a woman who understood her own life. Elliot had never asked about it. The household accounts always balanced. He had not needed to ask. She took 2 dresses, practical ones. Her good wool coat, a brooch her grandmother had left her. She paused over a small framed photograph from the 1st year of her marriage. She was 23 in it, standing in the garden of this house in the summer, squinting slightly into the sun. She looked like a woman who had not yet decided whether to be hopeful or careful. She set it on the dressing table and moved on. The letter she left was 4 sentences. I have kept this house and this marriage with everything I had to give. I am not leaving in anger, though I understand if that is hard to believe. I am leaving because I have spent 9 years becoming invisible, and I find I am no longer able to continue. The household accounts are in order. You will find the June correspondence in the 2nd drawer of the study desk. She did not sign it your wife. She signed it Nora. She placed it on the breakfast tray in the hall, where the housekeeper would find it, and walked down the back stairs, and let herself out through the kitchen door, into the gray Boston pre-dawn. It was 6 blocks to the train station. She walked all 6 of them without looking back. Elliot Ashworth found the letter at 7:45. He read it once, quickly, with the scanning attention of a man accustomed to legal documents, looking for the operative clause, the part that resolved the confusion into something actionable. He read it again more slowly. Then he set it down and drank his coffee and told himself that Nora had gone to her sister in Charleston, that the letter was written with unnecessary drama, that she would be back by Thursday at the latest, and that the phrasing about becoming invisible was the kind of thing women said when they were upset and needed to be listened to, not taken literally. He told himself this with considerable confidence for approximately 4 days. On the 4th day, the dinner he had scheduled for 2 clients arrived without a menu having been arranged. No one had spoken to the cook. He had assumed, without examining the assumption, that the machinery would continue to run. It was only when the cook appeared in his study at 4:30, looking politely confused, that he understood the machinery had a source, and the source had left. He sent a telegram to Charleston. His sister-in-law, Nora's younger sister Beatrice, replied in 24 hours with 4 words, "She is not here." He sent for his oldest friend and colleague, a man named Warren Fitch, who had known Elliot since law school and had also known, in the careful way of a perceptive person who has decided that honesty is more useful than comfort, that Elliot's marriage was not functioning the way Elliot believed it was functioning. Warren arrived on a Thursday afternoon and listened to Elliot explain the situation with the calm, organized precision of a man presenting a case. "She left," Elliot said, "without adequate explanation. I need to locate her." Warren sat across the desk and was quiet for a moment. "She left you a letter," he said. "It was vague. What did it say?" Elliot handed it across. Warren read it. His expression did not change, but something behind it did, the small adjustment of a man who has just had a suspicion confirmed. "She said she was leaving," Warren said. "People say things when they're upset. Nora Ashworth does not say things she doesn't mean." Warren set the letter down carefully. "You know that better than I do. She'll come back when she's ready to discuss it reasonably." Warren looked at him for a moment. "I'm trying to decide how to say this to you in a way that will actually reach you," he said. "Say it plainly." "All right." Warren leaned forward slightly. 4 nights ago, at Clifton Morse's dinner, you introduced your wife of 9 years as something like your housekeeper's assistant, in front of his business partner, 3 colleagues, and their wives. You smiled when you said it. You did not look at her face when you said it. You turned back to Morse before the sentence had finished landing and continued your conversation. Elliot's jaw tightened. It was a joke. It was 9 years in a single sentence. And Nora sat at that table and smiled. And you did not notice what that smile cost her, and that is precisely the point. The word landed in the room and sat there. That is an enormous interpretation of a throwaway remark, Elliot said. It is, Warren said. And Nora arrived at it before I did, and she has been arriving at smaller versions of it for longer than either of us has been paying attention. He stood. She didn't leave because of one dinner, Elliot. She left because that dinner proved something she had suspected for years. That the woman managing your household and your career and your social standing has always been, to the working part of your mind, a function. Useful, reliable, present. The woman attached to the function was secondary. Silence. Then tell me the name of the man she reseated at your November dinner, because he and Hargrove had a dispute that would have embarrassed the firm if it surfaced over the soup course. Warren's voice was quiet. Tell me which of the Morse wives said something unkind about Adele Morse 2 seasons ago, and how Nora arranged the table at your spring luncheon so that encounter never happened in front of you. Tell me the name of the woman whose foundation paperwork she has been organizing for 8 months without telling you, because she knew you would find it impractical. Elliot said nothing. You are a capable man in most ways, Warren said. But you have been married to a remarkable woman for 9 years. And you have treated her like an extremely well-maintained piece of infrastructure. And she has decided, finally, that she would rather be a person somewhere else than infrastructure in a very comfortable house. He picked up his coat. I'll make some inquiries, not because she's lost, but because you're going to ask me to. But Elliot, when you find her, consider seriously what you intend to do, because if you arrive with the expectation that she will come home and resume her position, you are going to lose her permanently. And that will be entirely your own doing. He left. Elliot sat in his study for a long time after the door closed. The house deteriorated faster than he had anticipated. He had known, in the abstract, that Nora managed things. He had never attached specific weight to the word managed, because the result of her management was a household that required nothing from him, which had always seemed like the point. He discovered the weight of the word in the days that followed. On Monday, the correspondence to the firm's charitable committee went out unsigned because no one knew which of the 3 versions Nora had drafted was the one she'd intended to send. On Wednesday, the housekeeper came to him with 2 invoices she didn't know how to code to the household accounts, and he discovered that the system Nora had built for managing the domestic finances was thorough enough that it could not be navigated by someone who had not been taught it. On Friday, he overheard 2 of the kitchen staff talking in the back passage. He was not meant to hear. They did not know he was there. She's not coming back, one of them said. Not from this. How do you know? Because I saw her face that last morning when she came through to check the pantry inventory. That wasn't a woman going on a trip. That was a woman finishing something. Elliot walked past the passage without acknowledging that he'd heard. He went to his study and sat down with the ledger Nora had left in the second drawer. Every entry in her precise, controlled hand, every balance correct, every note cross-referenced with the care of someone who had built something thorough enough to outlast her own presence. She had prepared for this, not recently. The preparation had the texture of years. By the 3rd week, the social circles had noticed. People did not ask directly, because in Boston's legal society, no one asked directly about anything that mattered. They asked whether Mr. Ashworth had heard from his wife recently, whether she was well, whether she was, the question carrying its weight in the inflection, traveling. He answered every inquiry with the composed certainty of a man who had not yet decided to be publicly alarmed. She was visiting family. She was perfectly well. She would return shortly. Warren came back on the 18th day. He had information. He did not offer it immediately. He sat down, accepted coffee, and said, "Before I tell you where she is, I need to know what you intend." "I intend to bring her home." "No." Warren set the coffee down. "You don't bring Nora anywhere. You ask and the answer may be no. She is not lost, Elliot. She left. There is a considerable difference. Where is she?" "Boston. She found lodgings through a contact, one of the women she'd been corresponding with. She has a room with a respectable widow on Newbury Street." Warren paused. "She's working. She's been helping women manage the administrative and legal paperwork around charitable foundations and estate matters. 3 different families in 2 weeks, all of them women who lost husbands and couldn't navigate the systems alone. Elliot said nothing. She's good at it, Warren said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite admiration and not quite sorrow. The kind of good that makes you understand she was doing this half her life without anyone calling it skill. He paused. She declined to see me, politely, completely. She sent down word that she was not receiving visitors associated with the Ashworth house, and the woman who delivered the message did it with the calm of someone who had been given those instructions and intended to honor them. She has someone speaking for her. She has a life, Elliot. That is what I have been trying to tell you. The silence that followed had a different weight than the silences before it. Not the silence of a man who hadn't heard. The silence of a man sitting with something and finding it heavier than expected. I introduced her as a housekeeper's assistant, Elliot said. Yes, in front of people who matter to my career, in front of people who were also her guests, whom she had been managing for your benefit for years. Warren's voice was even. And you did not notice you'd done it until I just said it back to you. Elliot stood. He walked to the window that looked out toward Marlborough Street, the same street Nora had walked down before 6 in the morning with 1 bag and 9 years of quiet erosion. What do I do? He said, and it was the first time in 19 days that the question was genuine, not the complaint of a man expecting someone else to resolve it, the actual question of a man who did not know the answer. Warren sat back. You begin, he said, be understanding that this is not a problem to be argued into resolution. It is a wrong to be acknowledged, and those are not the same thing. The tools that have made you successful in every other part of your life will not work here. He stood. And then you wait, because she is not going to move toward you until she has seen, not been told, that the man who comes to her is different from the man she left. And if she never sees it, Warren picked up his coat, then you will have had a remarkable woman beside you for 9 years, and never truly known it until she was gone. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I need you to understand it might. He left. Elliot stood at the window for a long time. To Newbury Street on a Tuesday. He had spent 4 days doing something he had not done in a long time with any real seriousness, sitting still and thinking about Nora. Not about the situation, not about the practical consequences, or what Clifton Morse might have heard. About her, the actual woman, the way she could enter a room of people who did not know each other, and have the seating arrangement solved in the time it took to accept a glass of wine. The way she had paused once, midway through drafting a letter on his behalf, and said, this will sound defensive here, better to phrase it this way, and handed it back to him, and she had been right, and he had used her phrasing and never mentioned that he had. The way she had looked at him sometimes briefly, with an expression he had always moved past too quickly to read. He understood now, riding through the October morning, that the expression had been grief. She had been grieving, quietly, for years. And he had looked at it and reorganized it in his mind as something manageable and moved on to the next thing. He arrived at the address Warren had given him. A clean stone-fronted building on a respectable block, the kind of address that said its occupant had made a deliberate choice rather than arrived by necessity. He knocked. A woman answered, solidly built, middle 50s, with the calm eyes of someone who had been given specific instructions and intended to carry them out. I'm here to see Mrs. Ashworth, he said. Your name? Elliot Ashworth. She looked at him with the patient assessment of a woman who had been briefed in detail. Mrs. Ashworth is not receiving visitors from the Ashworth house. I am her husband. Yes, sir. I'm aware. She did not move. She asked me to give you this. She held out a folded note. He took it. I am well. I am not ready to speak with you. Please respect my time. No signature. He stood on that step, holding 3 sentences, and the door closed. And he stood there for considerably longer than he had expected to stand there. He was a man of professional standing, of social position, of 14 years of practiced authority in courtrooms and boardrooms, and he was standing outside a lodging house on Newbury Street, holding a note from a woman who had decided, with complete composure, that she was not ready to see him. There was nothing he could do with that, no argument, no leverage, no reasonable case he could present. The door was closed. He walked back to his lodgings and sat down and wrote a letter. He wrote 6 versions and discarded all of them because every version longer than 4 sentences turned into a man organizing his defense. He had read enough of Nora's correspondence over the years to understand the difference between a letter that says something and a letter that argues something, and he had finally arrived, with Warren's voice somewhere in the back of his mind, at the understanding that this was not a case to be argued. He sent 3 sentences. I am not here to ask you to come home. I owe you an apology. I do not know how to write. I would be grateful for the opportunity to try, at a time and in a setting entirely of your choosing. He waited. The reply came on a Sunday, in Nora's precise, unornamented handwriting on plain paper. There is a public lecture at the Boston Athenaeum on Wednesday afternoon. The topic is Women's Legal Standing in Charitable Administration. I will be attending. I will not be attending with you. I will not prevent you from attending the same public event. He wrote back one word: Wednesday. He arrived early and sat in the back row, which was not where Elliot Ashworth normally sat at any event in his life. He sat in the back because he was not there as Elliot Ashworth, senior partner, man of standing. He was there as a man who had earned nothing beyond the right to be in the same room. The hall filled. A woman at the podium was speaking, brisk and knowledgeable, when Nora arrived with another woman, late 40s, simply dressed, who deferred to Nora in small ways that suggested Nora was the guide in this particular territory, not the guest. They found seats near the front. Nora removed her gloves and opened a small notebook, and did not look toward the back of the room. Elliot watched her for the better part of an hour. He had been in the same house with her for 9 years, and he was watching her the way you watch someone you are seeing for the first time. She asked a question during the lecture, specific and well-formed and sharper than most of what had come before it, and the speaker answered with the slightly recalibrated respect of someone encountering a more focused mind than expected. The woman beside Nora touched her arm briefly, the small gesture of someone who was proud of her. Nora smiled. A small private smile, not the smile she had worn at Clifton Morse's dinner table. That one had been a door closing. This one was simply open. Hers opened on her own terms. Afterward, when the crowd had thinned, she turned. She had known he was there. He understood that without needing it explained. Nora always knew where everyone was in a room. She did not come to him. She stood near her seat and waited, and he walked to her. Nora, he said. Elliot. Her voice was even. Not cold, not warm. The deliberate neutrality of someone who had decided to take this 1 minute at a time. The lecture was interesting, he said, and meant it, and then felt the inadequacy of it. Dr. Marsh makes a reasonable argument, she said, though she doesn't go far enough on the question of co-administration rights. She said it simply without performing expertise, just possessing it. I came to, he stopped. Started again. I wrote to you. I said I owed you an apology. You did. I still do. And I find I don't know how to make it, because every version I write begins in the wrong place. Nora was very still. What's the wrong place? Myself, he said, explaining myself, accounting for myself. Every version starts with what I meant, or what I didn't mean, or what I didn't understand. And the problem is that every version of everything for 9 years started with me. The hall was nearly empty now. The woman Nora had arrived with stood near the door, giving them distance with the tact of someone who'd been briefed. What are you asking, Elliot? I'm asking if you'll allow me to call on you, not to persuade you, just to. He stopped. I have things I need to say to your face, not arguments. And after I've said them, whatever you decide, I will accept. Nora was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and absolutely precise. I do not think your regret is the same thing as my safety. The words went into him like a key turning in a lock. He did not answer immediately. There was no immediate answer worth giving. He stood with it, and she watched him stand with it, and the fact that he did not argue or redirect or reframe it seemed to register somewhere in her expression. Not as forgiveness, as information. No, he said finally. It isn't. You're right. She held his gaze for a moment. I walk along the Commonwealth Avenue Mall on Friday mornings, she said. From 9 to 10. I'm telling you where I am. What you do with that is your business. She collected her notebook and gloves. Good evening, Elliot. She walked to the door, said something quiet and warm to the woman waiting there, and they left together. Elliot stood in the emptied lecture hall and turned over what she had said. I do not think your regret is the same thing as my safety. Not a wound. A truth. The kind that cannot be argued away once you've heard it clearly. He was on the mall at 8:30 on Friday. He sat on a bench near the central path and felt, for the first time in memory, straightforwardly nervous. He negotiated credit terms and contested wills and courtroom cross-examinations. He was nervous on a garden bench on a Friday morning. Nora arrived at precisely 9, with the other woman, whose name he had since learned was Mrs. Penny Holt, a widow who had apparently become both Nora's lodging companion and her most steadfast daily ally. Mrs. Holt looked at him with the frank evaluation of a woman who had been thoroughly briefed and was drawing her own conclusions. Give us a few minutes, Nora said. Mrs. Holt moved down the path with the discretion of a woman who had decided she was going to hear about this in detail over supper regardless. Nora sat on the far end of the bench, measured. She looked at him. You came, she said. You told me where you'd be. I also told you it wasn't an invitation. I know, he said. I thought you'd expected me anyway. Something moved briefly in her face, almost humor. I had, she said. He took a breath. When Warren told me you were working with the foundation cases, he said, that you were helping the widows navigate the administration systems. He said you were good at it. He paused. I realized I had no right to be surprised. I had watched you do the same work for our household for 9 years, and never called it work, never called it skill. I called it you managing things, the way you'd say a watch keeps good time, not equality, not intelligence, just function. Nora said nothing. I introduced you as a housekeeper's assistant, he said, and I didn't know I'd done it until Warren said it back to me in my own study. He stopped. That is the thing I cannot move past, Nora. Not that I said it, that it came out of me that easily, as though the woman across the table from me had at some point ceased to be a person and become a position. And I didn't even notice the moment that happened. Nora looked at the path in front of them. A couple walked past with a dog. An older man read a newspaper on the next bench. I told myself, she said, for 9 years that I was being sensible, that the arrangement was reasonable, that I had security, and a household, and a position in a city where I knew no one when I arrived, and that wanting to be seen in addition to all of that was asking for too much. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I told myself that enough times that I almost believed it. Did you ever try to say it? He asked. To me. She was quiet for a moment. Once. In the 2nd year. We were at breakfast, and I said I sometimes felt like I wasn't sure you remembered I was there as a person, and not just as the person who kept everything running. She looked at her hands. You said, of course I remember, and passed me the newspaper, and then we discussed your Thursday appointments. He said nothing. I didn't try again, she said. Not directly. I thought if I simply did the work well enough, did it visibly enough, you would eventually see it. That it would speak for itself. A pause. It didn't. I'm sorry, Nora, I know, she said. And she meant it. Not as forgiveness, as acknowledgement of something real. She turned slightly toward him. I have a question I need to ask you. Ask it. If I told you that I will not come back to what we were, that I will keep my own address, my own work, my own standing in these circles, would you still want to be in my life? He did not hesitate. Yes. Not because you're hoping I'll change my mind eventually. Not because of that, because you actually want to know me, on whatever terms are possible. Yes, he said. That is exactly what I mean. She studied his face for a long moment. Come back next Friday, she said. Same time. He went very still. You said you weren't inviting me. I'm changing the terms, she said. I want to see you weekly. Fridays, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. I won't be. She stood, smoothed her coat, looked at him directly. I am not promising you anything beyond the next conversation. I need you to hear that clearly. I hear it, but I am. She paused, chose the words deliberately. I am no longer assuming the worst of what you might become. You should understand what it cost me to say that. He stood. I do, he said. I won't waste it. She held his gaze one more moment. Then she called to Mrs. Holt, who came forward from her polite distance with the expression of a woman who had already composed her commentary for supper. Nora walked toward her without looking back. Elliot Ashworth stood on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall and did not move for a long time. Not because he was uncertain. Because for the first time in his life, stillness felt like the correct response, the right way to hold something without breaking it again. The Friday meetings became the frame of something neither of them had yet named. November came. They moved their conversations from the mall to the reading room of the Athenaeum, where they sat at a small table with books neither of them opened, and spoke with the particular honesty of people who have decided that clarity is the only language worth using anymore. He told her things he had never told anyone, that his first marriage had not ended because of cruelty, but because he had treated it the way he had treated this one. As a system to be maintained rather than a person to be known. That he had understood this only after Nora left, which was a fact he was not proud of. That he had built his career on being the most prepared person in any room, and he had never once applied that preparation to the interior of his own life. You could have told me, she said one Friday, about your first marriage, about why it ended. I know that. Now, you couldn't then. It was not a question. No, I think I believed that speaking about a failure to the woman who depended on me succeeding would undermine something. Some necessary structure. He paused. I understand how that sounds. It sounds like a man who absorbed his father's model of marriage without ever examining it, she said. He looked at her. Yes, exactly that. Those things don't arrive in the mail, she said. You absorb them from the house you grow up in, until something makes you stop. What made you stop? She was quiet for a moment. The dinner at Morse's house, she said, but not the words themselves. The way you moved on afterward. You turned back to Clifton and continued your sentence, and I sat there and I thought, he doesn't know. He genuinely doesn't know what he just said. And if he doesn't know, then he has never known, and he is never going to know unless I become someone he can no longer ignore. Someone who is not simply there. She looked at her hands, and the only way I could think of to do that was to not be there. The room was quiet. I'm glad you did it, he said. She looked up at him sharply. I know how that sounds, he said. But I mean it entirely. If you had stayed, I would be in that house right now, managing my calendar, telling myself the household was running well, and you would be disappearing one more year at a time, and neither of us would have understood what was happening. You leaving was the only thing that made me capable of sitting in this room. He looked at her directly. You leaving was the most important thing you ever did for this marriage, even though you didn't do it for the marriage. Nora was very still. That, she said, is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. I have some ground to make up. And Nora Ashworth, for the first time in a long time, laughed. Not the managed social laugh of a dinner party. The real one, brief and startled out of her. She pressed her fingers to her lips as though catching it, and then she let it go. Elliot watched it happen with the expression of a man who has found something he had not known he was looking for. December brought its complications. Warren came to Elliot's office on the second Tuesday of the month with news he had not been asked to deliver but was delivering anyway because it was Warren, and Warren had a long-established habit of telling Elliot things he needed to hear before he knew he needed to hear them. She submitted a proposal, Warren said, to the Athenaeum's Civic Committee, a formal program for legal and administrative assistance to women managing inherited charitable foundations. 3 case studies attached. All 3 are cases she handled herself. When the committee received it last Thursday, Elliot said nothing. I'm not telling you so you can manage it, Warren said. I'm telling you because the committee chair asked me if I knew anything about the woman who wrote it, and I told him she was one of the sharpest administrative minds I'd encountered in 12 years of legal practice, which is the truth. He paused. The committee is inclined to approve the proposal. They need one more letter of professional endorsement. Elliot picked up a pen. Elliot, Warren said. She would know if I did it. She would. She would think it was leverage. She might. Then I need to do it in a way that makes clear it isn't. He set the pen down. Who else could write it? Warren was quiet for a moment. Clifton Morse, he said slowly. He's on the committee, and he owes you something after the dinner, though he may not have framed it that way to himself. Elliot considered this for a moment. I won't ask Morse, he said, but I'll tell him I think the proposal has merit and that the work behind it is serious. What he does with that is his business. Warren looked at him for a long moment. You're learning, he said. I'm trying. Those are not the same thing, but the first one often leads to the second. Morse added his endorsement to the committee file the following week, without being explicitly asked to, and submitted it with a note describing the proposal as demonstrating considerable civic foresight. He mentioned it to Elliot afterward over coffee, in the way of a man who wants it understood that he has done the right thing and noticed that he's done it. Elliot thanked him and said nothing else. Nora found out about the endorsement through the committee secretary, who mentioned in passing that Mr. Ashworth had apparently spoken well of the proposal to several committee members. She stood in the Athenaeum's front hall for a moment after the secretary moved on, holding her portfolio, and processed this. He had done it without telling her, without using it as evidence, without arriving at her Friday meeting with it in hand, like a card played at the right moment. She walked home through the December cold and stood in the small front room of her Newberry Street address without taking off her coat for longer than she might have expected. Mrs. Holt found her there. You've had news, Mrs. Holt said. It was not a question. He supported the proposal, Nora said. Through Morse. Without telling me. Mrs. Holt sat down across from her, with the manner of a woman settling in for a conversation she had been expecting. He didn't tell you, she said. No. Silence. Well, said Mrs. Holt. I know, said Nora. That's something different from what I expected from him. It is. Nora sat down. The thing is, she paused, it's what I would have done, for him. That's exactly what I would have done. Made sure the work was seen by the right person, quietly, without attaching myself to the outcome. She looked at the window. I did that kind of thing for 9 years, and he never. She stopped. It's not the same as an apology. I know that. It doesn't fix anything. No, Mrs. Holt said. But it's a man who understood something without being told to. I know. Nora pressed her fingers to her sternum briefly. And I don't know what to do with the grief underneath that. The recognition that this version of him existed all along, that he was capable of it, that I spent 9 years beside him while he wasn't. Mrs. Holt was quiet for a moment. He wasn't showing it, she said finally. That is not the same as it not being there. You didn't fail to find it, he failed to show it. Nora nodded. She was quiet for a long time. What do I do? She said finally. I think, Mrs. Holt said, that you already know. She sent him a note that evening. Come to supper Saturday, 6 o'clock, bring nothing. He arrived at 10 minutes to 6. Mrs. Holt let him in with the expression of a woman who had cooked for this precise occasion, and had strong opinions about how the evening should go. Opinions she intended to communicate through the quality of the food and the strategic timing of her exits. The table was small, 3 places set. Nora, Elliot, Mrs. Holt, who was not a guest but a resident of this house, and whose presence at the table Nora had made clear was not optional. Elliot sat without comment on the size of the table or the number of settings. He looked around the small dining room, simply furnished, bookshelves along one wall, a stack of files on the sideboard that had been moved to make room for the dinner service, and said, "This room suits you." Nora looked at him. "It does," she said. Mrs. Holt said the soup was getting cold. The conversation moved carefully at first, and then not carefully at all. Elliot asked about the foundation cases with the specific, focused attention of someone who wanted to understand how they actually worked, where the legal obstacles were, what the courts consistently got wrong. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered what she had said the previous Friday, and connected it to what she was saying now. It was, Nora recognized with a feeling she did not entirely welcome, the kind of conversation she had wanted from him for 9 years. At one point, Elliot told a story about a deposition that had gone badly sideways in a way that was genuinely funny, and Mrs. Holt laughed out loud, and Nora added a detail to the story that she had heard from Warren at the time, a detail Elliot hadn't known, and Elliot looked at her and said, "How did you know that?" And Nora said, "I know everything, Elliot. I always have." And the table laughed. Afterward, Mrs. Holt excused herself with the decisive tact of a woman who knew exactly when a room needed to be smaller. Nora and Elliot sat across the small table with the last of the coffee between them. "I know about the proposal endorsement," she said. He went very still. "Warren mentioned it," she said through channels. She held his gaze. "You did it without telling me." "I didn't want it to be leverage." "I know what you didn't want it to be," she said. "And it wasn't. That is exactly the point." She paused. "You did it the way I would have done it. Quietly. For the work, not for credit. For the thing to be seen because it deserved to be seen, not because it served you to have it seen." Her voice steadied. "Do you understand how long I waited for someone to do that? Not even for me. For the work. For the thing I was capable of to be treated as a thing worth taking seriously." Elliot was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked slightly. He was not a man who cried, and he was not crying, but something in his face was close to the edge of something real. "You told me," he said finally. "That's enough." Nora looked at him across the small table. "I am not coming back to what we were," she said. "I will keep this address. I will keep this work. I will keep Mrs. Holt, who will find you manageable eventually, though it will take her until March at the earliest." A pause. "I am Nora Voss Ashworth in my own standing, not in relation to your household or your firm. That does not change. I wouldn't ask it to. If you come into my life, you come into this life. You sit through lectures at the Athenaeum. You understand that my opinion has weight, and you treat it accordingly, in public, in front of people who observe and remember. And if I look across any table we ever share and see that look, the look of a man who is not seeing the person in front of him, I will say so directly, and you will hear it. I will hear it. And I will not disappear again," she said. "Not for comfort, not for peace, not for the appearance of a smooth household. If something is wrong, I will say it. You will have to be able to receive that." "I'm learning," he said. "I intend to keep learning." She studied his face for a long moment. "There is a committee presentation at the Athenaeum next Thursday," she said. "My proposal. I will be speaking in front of 14 people, including Morse and 2 members of the firm you've been cultivating for 2 years. I intend to argue directly for expanded co-administration rights, which some of them will find inconvenient." She held his gaze. "I want you in the room, not to manage the impression of it. To be proud of it." Something moved across his face, warmer and more careful than a smile. "I will be there," he said. "Don't be late." "I won't." He was early. He sat in the 3rd row, which was not where Elliot Ashworth normally sat at anything. He sat in the 3rd row because he was not there to be seen. He was there to see. The room filled. Nora arrived with Mrs. Holt and two of the women from her foundation cases arranged the papers in front of her with the economical precision of someone who had given thought to every minute of the next 45 and did not look toward the third row. She spoke for 20 minutes without consulting her notes, except to cite specific statutes, and she argued her case with the particular confidence of a woman who has been right about something for a long time and is finally saying it out loud in the right room. She fielded 3 questions from committee members, answered 2 of them before they were fully formed, and disagreed, politely and specifically, with Clifton Morse on the question of trustee authority. Morse conceded the point. A man near the front, a new partner at the firm Elliot had been cultivating, leaned to his colleague and said, not quietly enough, "Who is she?" Before his colleague could answer, Elliot said, from the third row, clearly and without being prompted, "Mrs. Nora Ashworth. She built the legal assistance program for the Women's Foundation Network. No one in this room understands the co-administration framework the way she does." The man turned, recognized Elliot, recalibrated. Nora heard it. She did not turn immediately. She let the moment settle into her, let it become real, let herself feel the weight of it without qualifying it, or filing it away before it had finished arriving. Then she turned her head, just slightly, just enough. Elliot was looking at her. Not with the distracted expression of a man noting movement in a room. Not with the careful smile of a man managing appearances. With attention. Full unperformed attention. The look of a man who saw the woman in front of him and knew without hesitation exactly who she was. Nora Ashworth looked back at him across those rows of chairs, and she smiled. Not the smile from the Morse dinner, the one that had been a door closing, a decision composed behind glass. Not the managed smile of 9 years of making everything work without credit. This one was something she had not worn in a very long time. The smile of a woman who had walked out of a beautiful house on Marlborough Street in the pre-dawn dark with one bag and her own name, and built something real in 3 rooms on Newbury Street, and sat across a small supper table and offered terms on her own authority, and watched a man she had once given everything to choose, with his eyes open and nothing to gain but the truth, to meet her on her ground. It was the smile of a woman who had not left to punish anyone. Who had left because staying had required her to disappear. Who had discovered, on the other side of that leaving, that she was not someone who needed to be retrieved or forgiven or restored. She was someone who needed to be seen, and in a Boston lecture room in December, in the voice of a man who said her name clearly and without hesitation, she had been. Nora turned back to the committee, picked up her notes, and finished her argument. She had work to do.